So I've got a Volkswagen Tiguan come in today with a leaking rear main seal that I'm going to be replacing. Is the EA888 chain drive 2 litre TSI motor. CAW looks like the engine code on the side there. And I don't know if they've left the oil cap loose or it's twisted or something, but yeah, the oil cap is loose also. So it looks like they've been topping the oil up and not put the oil cap on properly. But there is also oil all down the side of the gearbox, and the whole underside of the car is coated in oil also. So we'll be pulling the gearbox off of this. It is a 4-motion automatic, it's not a DSG. So yeah, we'll pull that gearbox off and get the rear main replaced. So we've got all the airbox removed. We've removed the battery and the battery tray, just for access obviously to the engine mount or gearbox mount, and all the selector and stuff. So yeah, well, I've undone the engine earth as well from here, working with the battery disconnected as it makes it safe, and we need it out of the way anyway. Starter motor cable, the positive's been disconnected, and we've unplugged the wiring plug, so that's all tucked out of the way here. That red tab needs to be pulled back before you can this red tab here needs to be pulled back like it is now before you can take these off. And I just go in behind and just lift that little tab in there with a little pick or a screwdriver, and I'll just get a trim tool under here and just pop this ball off. So just a tool like that. Just undo these 2 bolts here if we want, just to pop this selector cable off. Just a little bit of an update, we've got all that selector cable unbolted from here. I've unbolted this bracket as well. You can slip the cable out, but I just prefer to undo the 2 10mm nuts that are just down here. So that's now can sit out of the way. And then I've gone ahead and undone all the top bell housing bolts on the gearbox. So all those bell housing bolts have been removed, and I've unplugged the position sensor on the top of the gearbox also. So we're pretty much ready to go up in the air now and start unbolting all the stuff from underneath. I've also, while I'm up here, unclipped this wiring harness, just pressing that piece in the middle there. Also unhooked all the wiring harnesses that were inside this section here. So they were all inside this little thing here. So I've just unclipped that and just chucked them out in front of it. So they've all just been pushed in front of the gearbox now. So just going under the car for the first time, and we can see the amount of oil. So this car has already been diagnosed previously. So yeah, we've looked at this a couple of months ago. You can just see the amount of oil that is coming out from under this car. We'll rip this under tray off so we can carry on our repairs, and we'll look even further. So you can see I've gone up and undone the prop shaft bolts. Spun the prop shaft with 3 10mm 12-point bolts that hold that prop shaft to the rear of the transfer case on the back of the gearbox. Undone the gearbox bolts on the bottom as well. We can see the large size of this oil leak. I've popped out both drive shafts also. And I've undone the nuts on the bottom of the control arms to the ball joints on both sides. So just unbolted this bracket from the rear of the engine. So it sits up in here, bolts onto the transfer case and onto the back of the engine. As you can see, there's a few bolts holding that on. So we're now going in through the right hand front wheel arch, and you can see my extension. You can see my extension running over the top of the transfer case. undoing the bolts. You can see 116 on the left, and my extension is going over with a socket onto the other 16. And we're going to be undoing the bolts to the transfer case. We will need to remove this heat shield that's over the top of the drive shaft coupling there, because it is blocking us to that left hand bolt. And once that's out of the way, we'll get that left hand bolt off. And there's a couple, one that I've already undone there, another one there we'll leave till last. So we've got our transfer case removed, and now we'll have access hole for finding our torque converter bolts. So we'll turn the engine over on the crank bolt, which we'll find up in here. It's a 24mm bolt there. 24mm bolt. We'll turn the crank over, and then we'll see the bolts for those line up, and then we can basically just treat this now as a front wheel drive gearbox and pull that off. We've also unbolted the clamps for the lines and the bracket here. Just a couple of triple square bolts, and unplugged this multi-plug from here and this one from the side of the gearbox here. That's our transfer case. As you can see, there's the two top bolt holes, and then there'll be two the same at the bottom of the transfer case. So I've ut my ratchet on the crank there, 24mm. I've rotated the engine over. We now see this 16mm, I believe, nut that's on there. So it's a stud that's coming off the torque converter, and we'll undo the nuts. I believe there's 6 of them that we'll have to undo. So we'll just keep turning the engine over until they're in that window and undo them. And then once we've done that, we can then remove the gearbox mount under the gearbox. So we've got the engine mount, or gearbox mount I should say, unbolted from the top of the chassis up there. Last 2 bolts undone where the dowels are, so this bolt through here, the 18mm, and then the same on the dowel section onto the block here. These are the structural bolts, I'd say. Like I say, we've got all of our torque converter bolts or nuts off. They were 15mm heads. Just got to pop these lines out and make a mess, plug the holes hopefully. And what we'll do first, as this being the torque converter, we will put a pry bar or a screwdriver just through here, so then and wedge it in there, and wedge it in through this gap here, just so then when we pull the gearbox back, the torque converter stays with the gearbox and doesn't snag on the back of the flex plate on the engine. So this is what I mean with the pry bar. I've got the pry bar wedged downwards. It's going between the bell housing and the torque converter. So when the bell housing and the gearbox assembly comes backwards, the torque converter is definitely going to come with it. It's got nowhere to go. So just started separating. As soon as I undid the bolts and moved it, all the oil started out from between, clearly indicating that this rear main is leaking pretty bad, as we saw at the start with that under tray being so full. My pry bar works jammed in there, so holding that apart, keeping the gearbox at a decent gap at top and bottom, keeping it balanced. So we've got these balance adjusters on this jack that we can level it out, so leveling it out keeps it good. And I also wedged another one in at the back there, just to make sure it stays in the gearbox both sides. Like I say, screwdriver, pry bar, whatever you can, something straight that you can wedge in there just to hold and separate the torque converter, well, keep it with the gearbox. So now we can pull back and lower down. So that's the gearbox removed from the engine now, and you can see all those studs for the torque converter where it would go into the flywheel or flex plate, all the oil inside the gearbox. So we're going to pull this flywheel off. You can see I've already undone the bolts. Just to give a bit of history on this, we've smoke tested this car with a smoke machine, and we've also got an engine light on the dash, which I didn't show at the start of the video, but we've got an engine light on, which we'll pull the codes and just show you what it was. But we've pre-diagnosed this already. The engine light is caused by a air leak, lean condition. We smoke tested it through the oil dipstick tube, I think, from memory. And we have got an air leak out through the crankcase, so it's actually leaking out of the rear main, and that's what we're going to see when we pull this off. So just to show you as well, the vacuum pump above the gearbox is also leaking, and hence why that coolant fitting on the rear of the head is leaking. because oil has dropped down from that vac pump onto that coolant fitting. So before you say it's not a rear main that's leaking here and it's the vac pump, we do have a vac pump leak as well. But this is the reason we're replacing this rear main seal other than the oil leak is because we actually have an air leak. So this is our rear main seal, so we'll be unbolting all those Torx 30 bolts all around and popping that off, and then we'll see how bad the seal is. Obviously you can see a lot of oil all around it. Some of that's going to be coming from the vac pump and some of that's going to be coming from the rear main itself. So just to show you, I've just popped this side off already, and then we'll finish. Just so you can see what the seal looks like when they come apart. So there is no seal on the plate, it's come apart, that's meant to be bonded on there. As you can see, there is glue on there. The seal is on the back of the crank. So that's why we've got this major oil leak, but it's also why we've got this major air leak as well. So we've got our new seal, as it comes with a whole assembly, and it's got this plastic thing in to keep the lip of the seal, as it's got to go in over the crankshaft. So that's the seal installed and all bolted down. All these bolts I've torqued up to, I think I torqued these up to 8 or 9 newton meters, and I've brake cleaned and blown out all the thread holes for here because the bolts are thread locked. So we want clean threads. I think we're actually also sealing with the thread lock the oil from coming out past the bolts as well, as you might be able to see down through there. I think you can actually see the back of the inside of the crankshaft. And then we'll just address these coolant fittings and the vacuum pump, get that out of the way and throw all the gearbox back on. So we've got a drive plate back on, those bolts have been torqued up to 60 newton meters plus 90 degrees. So we'll chuck the gearbox back in now. So here we have it all finished up and all back together. And the engine's been washed down, so yeah, we now don't have any oil leaks. Got rid of all the oil mess that was underneath, and the car is ready to go. So yeah, it's all finished. We have cleared all the fault codes out of it. I've also double checked the PCV system, because that is something that if you've got that rear main leak, it can be caused in some circumstances by a failed PCV valve, which is this under here. This PCV valve can fail and it can cause lots of vacuum in the crankcase, so when the engine's running you'll pull this cap and you'll struggle to pull it off, and that can be a sign of a failed PCV valve. Now that put in lots of vacuum in the crankcase, it's been suggested that can cause the delamination or premature failing of that seal. So it's always something to bear in mind. This one's been replaced prior, and I think it's just a consequential issue that's been left with the car. So the oil leak has been left after the running issue has been fixed with regards to the PCV. Now we just have a lean condition due to there being a crankcase leak into the through the rear main. So now that that's fixed, we're all good to go. Like I said, the diagnostic for this was we actually smoke tested down through the dipstick tube. You can also go through the PCV. And we found smoke coming out from the top of the bell housing down through here. So yeah, we're all good to go and all back together now.